Hey everyone, it's been a while since my last video tutorial, and I had a request to do a tutorial on rendering in SolidWorks, and that's actually one of the things I do quite frequently, and I'm actually the only person at my job that knows how to do it effectively. So let's see what I can open up and have us play with here. We'll use one of my projects, because I don't think I've actually ever showed the YouTube universe what I actually do independently, which is my firearms company that I'm starting up called Apex Arsenal. Let's see. Let's do my AK model. Now, rendering can be done in as little as 5 minutes or as much as 3 to 4 hours, or really however long you want to spend setting up the scene and everything. And I'll actually show you I guess you could call it a scene that I'm working on, where I actually modeled a corner of a room and started laying out all of my models into one scene and rendering all of them in a photographic photoreal environment. And okay, so what you have here is one of the AK models that I've been working on for the past year. Right now, if I want to render this, I can go up to Render Tools, and I generally like to use the preview window rather than the integrated preview, just because it runs a little bit faster, and I have two monitors, so I can actually run the preview window on my other monitor and position it on this screen to get my image just right before I actually render it. And I don't know if you've been reading this message while I've been talking, but the rendering software PhotoView 360 likes to remind you that you can basically make your photo more realistic by adding a perspective view, which is a simple toggle button, and lights and cameras, which we'll get into a little bit later. And you can also add background environments, which I generally don't do because they don't really deliver the level of realism that I'm interested in. Actually, to give you guys a quick idea of what rendering can do, oh, we gotta go here. These are all of the renders I've compiled for a bunch of miscellaneous objects, and mostly weapons and things that I've modeled. This is a pretty simplistic render here, where I really didn't change the environment at all. I put it into an isometric view, zoomed in on it, and took my render shot. And you can adjust the resolution you want it to appear in. Right now this one's a 1080p. And you can get as sophisticated as, let's see, what's a good example here? This is a pretty good example. Having a completely disassembled rifle laying on the floor, and you can actually see how the objects are literally making contact and colliding with the floor to cast shadows and give the appearance that it's actually sitting there in reality. So we'll get to something this level closer to the end of the video. I'm going to do some basic rendering right now just to give you an idea of how it works. Okay, so right now you can see my preview window, which I generally run on the other monitor, but I'm going to leave it here so you guys can understand what it's really doing right now. You can see the render environment actually looks different in the preprocessor stage, which is the preview stage. So if I use my shift key and the mouse wheel, and what I mean by the mouse wheel is I'm actually clicking and holding the mouse wheel down, I can zoom in on my model, and then if I release and hold the control key and then use my scroll wheel again by clicking it, I can pan the model to a location I'd like. So pretty much what I'm going to do in order to get the best detail I can in the shot with the resolution I've set, I'm going to zoom in and watch my preview window until I basically reach an extent, which is the border of the render, and then I'm going to pan it over so I get it more or less in the center of the shot. And once I like where it's positioned, right now I have my scenes minimized, so I only have what I generally use, and actually most of these I don't even use. I generally stick with Dusty Antique just because I like the way the lighting is pre-configured. But if I want to change lighting or anything, I go up to the Display Manager tab here, and then I've got scene settings, which I can change background and environment, and I just usually leave those default. However, if I right click and go to edit scene, this is where I'm able to control the floor offset to the model, which will basically dictate how the shadows are cast. Under the advanced tab, I can change basically the size of the floor. So if I actually minimize the floor settings, I could actually cut off shadows. So I usually leave this to drive itself, because the larger your model gets, the larger your floor gets. Under the illumination tab, this will actually allow you to control the brightness settings of your environment, along with the refractivity and reflectiveness of the actual object or objects you're rendering. So I'm going to leave all those at default right now and go back under lights. And the interesting thing about the lights is that usually they're toggled to not be on in PhotoView. So right now, if you look over here, you can see this directional light 1. This light over here indicates that it is off in SolidWorks, or it's on in SolidWorks right now. So I can toggle it to off in SolidWorks, and you'll notice it go gray. So as you can see here, this one's already grayed out, which means that it's actually off in PhotoView 360 as well. So I can toggle it on in SolidWorks and then toggle it on in PhotoView, and it'll actually ask me to define some parameters if I want to, which I generally just check this box here and finish. Then I'm going to do the same thing to this light. So now they're actually on in PhotoView. And if I want, I can add lights by right-clicking on this folder, and I've got a bunch of different lights to choose from. If you add sunlight, it's basically, it floods out the render pretty quick. So I usually stick to directional or spotlights, but point lights can be useful in certain applications, which we'll get to later as well. The next thing you can control is cameras. And the reason cameras are useful is because if I want to basically render the same point, the same direction, the same picture essentially, and I don't want to lose my position, I can set up a camera that has a locked position. So that way, as I make changes to my model and the scene rebuilds, I can always snap back to that camera and take the same shot over after I'm done playing and tweaking my settings. So right now I'm not going to add any cameras. I'm going to actually do a render quick, but the last thing I'm going to show you is your render options here. And as you can see, my output is 1920 by 1080. And you have a bunch of various defaults to choose from, which are generally your standard monitor sizes. I do 1920 by 1080 mostly because I think it's a very universal size, and I like to use my renders as desktop backgrounds every once in a while. So that setting, along with your output format, I generally stick with PNGs because they preserve the quality of the image a lot better than JPEGs or TIFFs, and they're also way smaller than bitmaps. But the issue with PNGs is that with certain environments in SolidWorks, if you render it with a PNG, your environment disappears behind your object, so it makes the background transparent, and your physical model is really the only thing that's rendered. The next step down is where you save your renders, and I generally just leave my pictures folder default, and then I can drag and put them where I want later on because I generally render to a bunch of different folders. Next box is, oops, changed my resolution up here. The next box is render quality, and you have 4 options: good, better, best, and maximum. I have played with all of these for countless hours, and from personal experience, I never adjust the preview window above good because it takes a long time to actually pre-process the image, even in just a preview. So if I'm not rendering anything with transparency where I'm trying to assure that, the glass or the plastic looks just right, I always leave this to good, because it will give you a very solid idea of what your render is going to look like when it's finished. And as for final quality, you can go maximum, but it's pretty much going to double to triple your rendering time for practically unnoticeable changes compared to best. So I always render in best, and I've been doing this for probably 3 years now, and even when I decide, okay, I'm going to use maximum, if you compare a maximum render to a best render, you will not be able to see a difference unless you literally zoom in all the way on the image and try to scrutinize each pixel and each reflection or shadow. You really can't tell the difference unless you're sitting there for hours just studying and trying to pick out what's better about maximum. So enough about that. We will keep it at best. These here I almost never play with. Honestly, an entire tutorial by itself could go into tweaking all these settings and really showing you the difference of what's happening when you change these. But I guess just showing them to you and letting you be aware that they're there, you can go and experiment and figure things out by yourself from there, and just, kind of render with a whole bunch of different settings and try to understand exactly what's going on in there. Bloom is kind of neat to have on. It's hard to explain exactly what it does. It adds kind of like a I don't want to say an aura or something around your model, but it yeah, I guess I'll just have to show you exactly what it's doing. Contour or cartoon rendering, this one's pretty neat. If you've ever noticed, I don't know if you've ever looked at a technical manual where it has rendered images, but they also appear to have like almost a black outline, or the edges are all traced, almost exactly like what it looks like in SolidWorks when your edges are on. You see those black edges, but it also looks real. This is how they're doing that. This is the rendering with colors and textures and wow, word just totally slipped from me. Textures and materials, that's what I was looking for. Textures and materials. That's what this button does. It actually renders the contours with those materials visible. This one will render strictly contours, so you could actually make almost like a coloring book outline of whatever you're rendering. It'll remove all the materials and just make it a strictly black and white outline. I've done a couple of those, but I mean, really they're kind of just neat to do, maybe like a fake kind of technical drawing look to it. So I'm going to leave mine unchecked. What else do we got? Direct caustics. This is pretty much only used for rendering something like a liquid or a glass, something of the translucent or transparent nature. Network rendering, that is new to 2014, and I've never used it before, so I can't even really talk about that. But, alright, I will leave my settings the way they are, and we'll bring up my preview window one more time so we can see exactly what I'm going to be rendering. And then I'm going to drag it over to my other monitor so you won't see it. You can see up here in the preview you can add extended refinement or full resolution preview, which is generally pretty unnecessary, but I mean, if you feel you want to try it out and use that, by all means. Now you can see, I don't know if you remember what it looked like before with the rendering preview, but you can see after I turn those directional lights on, it's adding some highlights to certain features of my model depending on the angle that it's hitting, which adds a little bit more realism to it. So I'm going to move this over to my other monitor, and I'm going to start the final render. Now this is the actual render dialog box or window, which up until 2012 this box was incredibly basic. You actually didn't have all this information on the side here, which is telling you exactly what's happening while the render is processing. You can actually go in and change a lot of these post-processing options here after the rendering's done, and I rely on the SolidWorks environment to drive my render, so I almost never use any of these settings, and I've barely played with any of them to really know exactly what their benefits are. So yeah, I can't really talk a lot about those, but if you look over here on the render itself while it's being developed, these little boxes here represent your CPU cores. So if you're running a single core processor, you will only have a single square processing and moving across your image. Right now I've got a Core 2 or Ivy Bridge i7 processor, which is a hyper-threaded quad core. So what that means is I have no, it's not really going to show you because the render window takes precedent, but anyway, I can show you this way. If you go into your task manager and you go under performance, this will show you how many CPU cores you have. So I have 4 physical cores, but I have 8 virtual cores. So that's what the PhotoView 360 sees, and that's what it's using to actually render my image right now. So if you have a non-hyper-threaded quad core, you'll only have 4 squares. If you have a dual core, you'll only have 2. If you have a hyper-threaded dual core, you'll have 4. And I think you get the idea after that. So as you can see, that took just a couple minutes to render, and actually the exact time was 2 minutes and 14 seconds. That's an incredibly quick render, and that's really because I didn't change anything too demanding for the for PhotoView 360 to try and calculate reflections and shadows and everything like that. Now I can save my image, and it's going to default to, no, it shouldn't default to downloads, but I need to go to my pictures folder, CAD, renders, and I'll add it to my AK21 folder. Actually, these should probably be combined, but anyway. Oops, there we go. Save that. Now if we go into that folder, and this is the one, oh wait for it, there it is. See, and I rendered it as a PNG, so now you can see my background disappeared. So not really a big issue. If I want to preserve the background, the environment I should say, then I render with a JPEG format. Otherwise, what I use PNGs for, like I said before, I had a scene that I was working on, and that scene actually looks like, let's see, where is it? Probably in here. Okay, so it started out as me just modeling up a table, modeling some planks up, and the materials I applied to the plank are actually on every surface. So the grain follows the board on all sides and surfaces, and then I used end grain on the end. And then I started slowly putting more boards together and building up a table. And then I built a cinder block wall, which is actually literally just a cinder block with the mortar lines included, and then I just stacked and mated together a cinder block wall. And then you can see how my lighting is changing. I'm actually adding overhead lights to make it kind of look like a basement environment. And then I started slowly adding models and changing the lighting. I added a lamp with a I believe it's a directional light actually physically inside of this model, so that's how it looks like it's casting light directly onto the table. And I added a render inside my render, which I'll probably save that for a later tutorial, how I did that. And you can see the progression of it, like adding more and more. And you can see, if you notice how I'm paging through these, the environment stays exactly in the same location, and that's because I'm rendering from a camera with SolidWorks, so that's why this environment stays exactly where I want it. You can see the light changes. And that's it. This is another one where I laid them out on the floor and was playing with lights and shadows. So in order to do something in that level of detail, I'm going to actually see if I can dig that environment up real quick. No, that's not it. Maybe it's... I believe I found it. Now I go to the top level assembly. There it is. Open it up. And just a word of caution too, if you plan on doing something this elaborate, you're going to want to make sure you have appropriate specs to basically allow SolidWorks to even run something this large. So RAM and processing speed are very important. I guess I could even show you. That's a lie. I'm gonna let it do its thing. Anyway, you can watch my CPU just spike as it's trying to load this. No. fine. Best thing to do with SolidWorks in this situation is just be patient. It generally works itself out. Well, let me see here. Let's close that. Actually, I have an idea. I'm gonna reload this quick. There you can see it as my background there. Okay. I'm gonna go back and load that up. Okay, so I'm actually gonna load this lightweight. That way it's not gonna try and resolve it. That should solve the crashing issue. Okay, I'm just gonna let it wait and do its thing. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so from this view I'm hovering out in space, and you can see it's not a complete room obviously, and my renders on my wall actually aren't coming through because the models aren't resolved. So what I can do is open them up and load them, and I think it's not seeing the directory that picture is actually in anymore because I moved that. So I'm just gonna leave it the way it is. And that one's good. Okay, I got rebuilders, whatever. So now if I want to take another shot and replicate exactly the renders I have here, I have a camera set up. If I go under my views, you can see camera 1, and it will automatically take me to what I have set up. And it's a little deceptive because you can see where it's trying to crop my image here, but you can clearly see how it's actually rendering beyond that. So you'll have to play with it with the preview window to see what you're actually going to be rendering. And right now it looks really cartoony because I have it unresolved in order to load all these in, and I've got a bunch of other things running in the background right now. So usually if I'm gonna do something this elaborate, I'm not running anything on my computer except SolidWorks. I'm letting it have the full system resources it needs to load this. But if we go underneath cameras, you can see my camera one here, which let's see, edit camera. This is all the properties I have set up. I can change all my different settings for the actual lens of the camera. It's you're literally simulating a real-life camera at this point. Then I've got the lights I've set up in the scene, what are on and what are off in PhotoView, and that's because after a bunch of experimenting, I've decided exactly what I want on and off. And then under my actual scene properties, this is where I've controlled my illumination and reflections precisely to the way I want them to make the scene more realistic looking. And that is pretty much all I can show you in regards to rendering. It's really just going to come down to personal preference and experimenting with all the settings and figuring out what exactly, the object you're rendering will basically dictate what your environment should look like. For me, with firearms, I mean, a closed indoor environment is typically, where you would expect to see a firearm, get pictures taken of it. So when I render my firearms, I generally do it on like a floor setting, or like in this scene there's a table with a bunch of tools laid out and everything like that. If you're going to do some kind of large construction equipment or something that's meant to be outdoors, you're going to definitely have to play around with the lights a lot more, and especially probably consider using sunlight as one of your sources of light. And then maybe even changing your materials for how you lay out your environment. Like, actually, I have a good example of an outdoor render I did with my AK again, and it's probably under here. Nope. Yep, this one. I actually modeled a surface, and I freeformed the surface to make it look like a mound of sand, and then I impressed my model into the surface so that it was actually intersecting through it. And then I added a sun as my single source of light in this environment, so you can see how it's really it's basically pointing right at the AK. And now you can actually see the curved sloped surface of the sand, so it gives the illusion that it's kind of buried. So there's literally an infinite number of ways to configure and set up a scene and the objects you put in the scene. SolidWorks actually has quite a big library of different preset scenes over here that you could pick from. If you go into appearances, this is where all of my materials are applied to my models from, which I'm actually going to make a different tutorial explaining that, because that's again something else that needs to be explained by itself. But if you're going to use you don't necessarily want to use the material you think that your item should be made out of. For example, with my AK, in order to get the appropriate look I want in these renders, I actually have to apply a satin plastic material to what would normally be a steel piece in order to actually get it to look appropriate for the render. So you don't want to use the logic that, well, my rifle's made out of steel, so I should use the steel material. If you do that, you're not really going to be satisfied with the results. And for the sake of time, I'm not actually going to render this. I think that first render I showed you was a good enough example of what the rendering software actually does. Basically, the work you do here is 95% of your render, and then the work you do up here is the last 5%. You're basically previewing it, making sure it's aligned and set up right, and then you just go to final render and hit the start button. I mean, that's really all there is to it. It's basically all the time you invest in setting up your scene, and then you're essentially just hitting the flash button on a camera, taking a picture. So I hope this tutorial was helpful. If there was anything you felt that I missed out, please feel free to leave a comment, and I will try to include it in my next video, which I'm not really sure what that's going to be yet. I might just go and do the material application tutorial right away, because that one should be a pretty simple, quick one, like maybe 5 or 10 minutes to explain that. Other than that, I really appreciate the subscriptions and the views to my other tutorials. I definitely have taken notice that my intro to SolidWorks tutorial is just skyrocketing in views, and I'm really thankful to everybody who leaves a comment and tells me, you know, I'm better than all of their instructors, and I have the best videos on YouTube and all that. I mean, it really means a lot, and actually it feels good too, because it means that I'm actually, you know, competent enough to explain this to people in a way that makes sense to me. Because when I first learned this software, nobody could really explain the practical nature of the software. They kind of wanted to use all the big words and technicalities of it, and it's like, well, okay, I'm impressed you know what you're doing, but you're really not helping me learn what I'm doing. So that's why I like to go through and explain every single mouse click and explain every single process, and none of my videos are rehearsed. So when I feel like I'm gonna start up a tutorial, it's literally just me loading up my desktop capturing software and going, alright, let's walk somebody through doing, you know, rendering. And I've gotten comments that's actually most desired, because nothing I do is rehearsed, in the sense that if I make a mistake, you guys actually get to see me work around that mistake and figure out how to solve it, rather than having a perfectly polished and seamless video that basically doesn't show you the real world, because it's already, you know, it's rehearsed by the very definition. So anyway, enough of me rambling. Thanks again for watching, and hopefully it was helpful.